Hey all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. My name is Darren, and today I have a couple great guests that have been on before, Lloydd Capuccia and Kevin Liddell. We're going to talk about seasonings, spices, and sauces. I'll be right back.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey all, it's Darren again, and I want to make sure you check out Fire and Water Cooking Edible Creations, gourmet seasonings and sauces, now available on Amazon, Walmart.com, Etsy, and even on our regular website at fireandwatercooking.com. Check them out, guys, all made with great gourmet ingredients, including domestically made Texas black garlic, aged up to 60 days. These are some very unique flavors. Check them out. Blueberry and black garlic and coffee, all-purpose black garlic, and our triple B sauce, which has blueberry, black garlic, and balsamic vinegar. Check them out, guys. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back. Hey, all. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host, of course. And today we are going to talk about seasonings and sauces and spices and all that and how they're important to cooking. And I got a couple of friends of mine that have been on before. I have Mr. Lloydd Capuccia and Kevin Liddell. Lloydd, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell the people who you are.
Hey guys, I'm Lloydd Capuccia. I'm a transplant from Brooklyn, New York. I live in Seattle, Washington. Been cooking for 45 years, I guess. I'm retired now, and all I do now is lift weights and cook. That's it. I'm a geek in food, okay? I'm a geeky food guy. Kosher dosher. You can Google me. Kosher dosher. I'm everywhere.
All right. So now we have Kevin Liddell. Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm from North Central Pennsylvania. I've been cooking professionally for a long time, 25 plus years. And I've been into sous vide and other ideas of, different newer cooking techniques, and very interested in science of cooking, that sort of thing. What happens?
Well, you are also a graduate of the CIA, are you not?
I did do that. Yes.
You don't put that on your resume. You are.
I forgot. We've done a few podcasts before. I forget all the time.
All right. So these guys are really heavy into food, just like I am. All kinds of different food. Not just barbecue and sous vide, but we kind of touch on everything. We all kind of revolved around sous vide because it's such a cool cooking process. But today I want to just talk about seasonings and spices and sauces and the way we actually handle our food when we're cooking it, because the main protein and vegetables and stuff that we actually cook is a big part of it, but then getting that extra flavor and tickling our taste buds pretty much is really important as well. So we always talk about cooking processes, but we don't hardly ever talk about seasonings and spices and how important it is, the ones you use when you're cooking as well. So I want to talk out today. So first of all, just a general overall, seasonings I use separately than sauces, because seasonings are more like your dry seasonings, like, your herbs and spices and combinations. And then sauces are more used for finishing your meal. So, or you're finishing your food after it's cooked, but your seasonings and stuff are usually during cooking and can be after cooking as well. So what do you think how important do you think seasoning is in food as far as how we actually look at it? Go ahead, Lloydd.
It separates good food from bad food. If you don't season your food, I don't care what it looks like, it's going to taste like crap. The appropriate amount of salt, pepper, other seasonings, but salt is primarily the most important ingredient you can add to any dish. Without salt, it's going to taste like crap. Your palate will be able to recognize what you're eating.
Yeah, I think we can all, agree that if I just cooked a plain steak with nothing on it, with no seasoning whatsoever, it would be edible, but it probably wouldn't be as pleasurable. Even if it was the best Wagyu steak, it would still be kind of, oh yeah, this is a Wagyu steak, but if you don't have something on there to enhance the flavors of the meat, because what seasonings do a lot of times, it's not just overpower the flavor of the protein or the vegetables. It actually enhances the flavors, correct?
Well, it's neurological too, because the salt, your brain, your palate, how it all connects. You can't have one without the other. You can add on as many seasonings as you want, but your brain and your tongue won't really taste them without the salt. It won't. Kevin, what do you think?
I'm about 80% with you. There are some cuisines like Indian cuisine can get away with pretty minimal salt because they have so many spices in it and such that you can really you could, I'm sure, and I don't claim to have any really good experience with making Indian cuisine. I've done it off the cuff for some caterings and stuff, but it's not something that was really taught to me, and I've never really enveloped myself in it, which I should change because it's really a wonderful cuisine. But I also worked, one of the first restaurants I worked in, actually was the first restaurant I worked in after I graduated from the Culinary Institute of America, was on Nantucket, and the chef didn't use salt on anything except mashed potatoes. So I made the mashed potatoes every day, and that was the only thing that got salt. The rest of his steaks, I mean, everything. We had a few Jamaican workers there, and they called it the magic spice. He wouldn't give out what what it was and that sort of thing. And I'm not, so anyway, he claimed to not use salt on anything but in the mashed potatoes. And we're talking, this is later 1990s. And the cheapest dish on the menu was a $37 chicken dish. All our steaks were prime grade, everything. And I tried his stuff with his, what was, the magic spice, his rub. And I really did not feel there was a need for salt from that.
Do you think he had salt to it? Do you think he had a salt to it without telling you?
I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. That's a guess,
I can tell you that, I know salt it's important, and we're gonna delve deep into salt down the road here, but seasoning in general, though, even if they're just using garlic powder and onion powder, it's going to enhance the food that you're eating. And like I said, if you just cook a steak and you don't have anything on it, it'll be edible, but you're not going to get that wow factor. It's not going to be memorable. It's going to be kind of bland, and you got to have some kind of seasoning on it, even if it's Mrs. Dash with no salt in it.
Yeah, I think if you gave me a steak and Mrs. Dash doesn't have any salt in it, and there are a lot of relatively good salt alternatives. I don't play around with them because I don't have an issue with salt.
Yeah. MSG is the salt alternative.
Well, I if you were to give me some steaks and say, hey, we don't have any seasoning for you, what are you going to do? How to make these taste? I'd char them really well, because that would add a flavor. But other than that, I agree. You want seasoning, and salt is probably the most basic seasoning there is.
So let's just go back into, seasoning. So let's just say herbs and spices and salts and peppers and all that. When we're cooking the food, we usually do that. We don't usually, most of the times, use any kind of sauces. If we're doing a marinade, maybe. But sauces we usually use as a finishing. So like with barbecue, I usually don't even put any sauce on my barbecue. I use it as a condiment, more like you would ketchup and mustard. I have different kinds of sauces. So if I do ribs or pulled pork or brisket, even, I have different sauces that people can use as a condiment, more as a finishing. I don't usually use it to cook in. People will put sauces on, when they're cooking stuff, but I tend to think that sauces are geared more towards when you're sitting at the table ready to, add something to it, or like with a steak, a finishing sauce, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like Memphis has a wet rub and a dry rub, wet and dry, and, everyone has their own way. And, I personally, with my, when I do ribs, they're all delicious. Exactly. I've never had I don't think I've ever had barbecue that's actually cooked like barbecue that I didn't like.
Yeah, most of those, it's because of the barbecue, the commercial barbecue sauces especially have liquid smoke in them. So that's why, people will use it to cook it, because it already, you don't have to put it in a smoker. So you can take a rack of ribs, put a commercial barbecue sauce on it, cook it in the oven, and it'll be smoky because the sauce has liquid smoke in it. I just wanted to overall touch that how important seasonings and sauces are to food. So I want to talk about the tastes that we have in our mouths, because that's what makes us crave different seasonings and, makes us want to make better food is, our tongue, pretty much what it tastes like. Somewhat, how we see it, that has an effect, on our brain. You eat with your eyes, whatever, but it can look really good and still taste like crap.
Don't forget the nose. Don't forget the nose.
Yeah, the nose and the mouth are really, the big driving force. And, even, seasonings and sauces, they do smell. So you can produce, you got, salt, pepper, garlic. When you're griddling a steak, you can smell it. And it
Yes.
makes you go, man, I want that. So
Well,
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick.
remember that the sense of ours that's most directly connected to our memory is our senses, all our olfactory sense, our sense of smell.
Factory, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I can still smell my mom making, bread, homemade bread back when I was, 6 years old.
But if you walk by, if you're like not even thinking about your mom and your bread, and you are out in a mall somewhere and you smell something that smells like your mom's bread, it immediately brings you back to your mom's bread.
Yeah, exactly.
As like immediately without you having to think about it. You're like, oh my gosh, what was that? As opposed to like seeing a kid riding a bike you had when you were a kid and being like, what is that? No, that kid, what? No, immediately with the olfactory that's what it is.
So I just wanted to touch on, for years and years, until 20 or 30 years ago, we used to think we only had 4 tastes on our tongue. So we had bitter, salty, sour, and sweet is what, the main parts of the tongue. Different parts of the tongue have different, tastes is what, the map of the tongue and all that. And now we understand that there's actually a 5th, and it's called umami. And that's mostly characterized as savory. So it's a little bit of, it's not really the same as any of the others. So sweet, we all know, would be like, sugar or, fruits and stuff like that. Sour. And a lot of these, I've done some reading up on, what the science is on it, why we have these. And, some of them like bitter and sour are more of a protective measure.
Survival. It's a survival instinct.
Because if it's bitter, it could hurt you. So you don't, you spit it out, so it could be a poison. So sour the same way, that maybe the food's not, good, or, it could be bad, turn bad. Salty is, we crave salt. We need salt. So, we desire salt. So that's why we have the salty. And the umami, they found out it's, based on the glutamates, and it's more of so that we know we're eating good proteins. So that's kind of how they discovered why we have that taste in our mouth and what it actually is. So it's not just, it's a savory taste that's desirable. It's more of, something that we actually need in our bodies. And just like with the salt, why we crave salt, it's something that our body needs and survives on. So, a lot of people, you hear about umami, and a lot of people don't really understand what it is. And so, Lloyd, I know you've done a lot of studying on umami. So go ahead, and I'll let you kind of run with this a little bit and tell us your experience on umami.
People consider umami like, okay, you've added MSG to your food.
Get closer to your microphone or speak up. I can't hear you.
My dog is right here. I'm giving my dog some loving. So MSG, monosodium glutamate, right? It's a chemical. But you can get the same thing by using mushrooms, a lot of glutamates in mushrooms, of course, anchovies, fish sauce, fish salt, right? It does something on the chemical level where it actually increases the taste of proteins. So if you were to add, for example, fish sauce, fish salt, mushroom powder to your proteins, it will increase the flavor of that particular protein. And I coined using fish salt in my beef. And most of you guys that are listening have probably made hamburgers or stews before. And a recipe, or rather the ingredient they suggest using, is always Worcestershire, if I'm pronouncing it right, Worcestershire sauce, right? Why do people add Worcestershire sauce to their burgers and their stews? It's got anchovies in it, which has got glutamates in it, and it increases the glutamates in the food that we're eating. Now, I use fish sauce in my stews instead of Worcestershire sauce because it has a higher percentage of anchovies in it. But that's the glutamates you're tasting. It's the umami. It's that savory characteristic of beef you want to taste. So if you want to increase beef flavor, add glutamates. They can be in mushrooms, fish sauce, fish salt, and to a lesser degree, Worcestershire sauce. But I love glutamates.
Yeah. And I'm going to touch on it just a little bit because it's still out there. And one of the reasons, I just created my own seasonings and sauce, and, my original recipe had MSG in it, but there's still people out there that swear up and down that they have reactions to MSG, even though there's no scientific evidence that that's ever happened to anybody. And they don't understand that there's MSG in everything. And like you said, it's, the glutamates that's in, I swear there's people every day that will swear up and down, oh, I get migraines, I get this.
Tomato.
But there's some things that will never die, like beer can chicken, or or using a mustard as a slather on a pork butt. Some people they don't look at the science. They just I heard my grandma talking about MSG and how bad it is, and there's no scientific evidence that it is. So,
well, I did my I did a scientific paper when I was at CIA, and I was in contact with the Liddell Research Center in Philadelphia, who's pretty big on this. Is all pretty much what they do is they're a sensory research center, and big time. And I talked to a bunch of people there, went back and forth, and the topic of my paper was, is MSG actually bad for you or not? Excuse me. But from all the stuff that I was able to see, the only damage I was able to find through a scientific paper that MSG caused to a human was when they directly injected an MSG water saline solution straight into a nerve. So if you took some Coca-Cola and injected it straight into a nerve, you're going to do a lot more damage than just a saline MSG solution. So that was the only damage I was able to find. And I did it with my chef, Bob Del Grosso, who was he's just a genius. And when I told him I was doing that, he was so excited. And I did a pretty good paper on it. And it came down. I said, can you find any relevance to someone ingesting it orally to having any damage? I said, no, absolutely no way, in any way, shape, or form. And I have had Chinese restaurant syndrome once in my life, where I got lightheaded, headache, weird sort of stuff. And it's mostly from sulfites and different things in Chinese kitchen. I've never worked in a Chinese kitchen, but I know it's not the MSG. And I've had people, I worked with someone whose father would come in every time he had to eat, and he'd have to go into the walk-in and check the dressings on MSG. And I kept talking to her about how, this MSG thing is all bullcrap. And she would go on and on and on. She went to medical school, and I kept up with her. I'm like, have you found anything on MSG being harmful? She's like, no. I'm like, yeah, your dad's full of crap. So MSG has its limits. It's not going to make, if you sprinkle it on your salad, it's not going to make a difference. I would recommend anyone who thinks MSG, just dip your finger in it and taste it. It doesn't taste like much at all. It's not salty, and it doesn't. And there's a point to how much you can add MSG to something to make it better. Whereas salt, so if you add MSG a certain amount to, say, something, whatever you're cooking,
a stew,
and then you add another 100% of what you just added, it doesn't make it taste any better. It doesn't make it taste more MSG, or it doesn't do anything. But if you do that with salt, and then you add another 100% of the salt, now everything's twice as salty. So salt's different. So MSG, which contains a third sodium of table salt, doesn't necessarily create better flavors the more you add. So it's very sparing. We use it very sparingly, and maybe try a little bit and then try a little later. And once it's like right there, you don't want to. It's a waste of time to add anymore.
And that's another thing. When I was making my seasonings, I had very little in it, but just because it's on the label, people freak out and they don't even realize there's not a lot in it. It's not really going to affect you at all. And they're more worried about that than the nitrates in like pastrami and corned beef, which have more of effect on you than anything. I can eat, if you sit there and eat 2 tablespoons of regular table salt, you'll get sick, believe me. And people eat salt all the time.
If you can get 2 tablespoons of table salt down your throat, you'll be dead. If you can keep it down, because you'll throw up. You will. You won't be able to keep it down.
When I was a kid, we went on a field trip in school. I was probably in like 3rd grade, and I had remember the little boxes of little pretzel sticks you used to get?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I had a couple of those, man. And I would get all the salt out of the bottom, and I get all the salt and just eat all the salt that was in the bottom of the box. I got so sick. So let's just talk about salt and pepper. Why salt and pepper? They're our main staples, right? My wife, her mom, I think that's the only seasoning she ever used was salt and pepper on anything. And then that was sparingly. So she didn't understand seasonings at all. But salt and pepper is the only things we usually keep on our table, right? When we get the food in front of us and it's already been seasoned, don't be quiet. Just let me finish.
Mine's perfect. Doesn't even
so most of us have salt and pepper on the table. So we get a plate of food, even after it's been seasoned when we cook it, we can put a little bit more salt and pepper on it. So let's talk a little bit about that. Why are those 2 flavors, the most popular?
Oh, it all has to do with the spice roots, hundreds and hundreds, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I'm not going to say thousands and thousands, but close. I mean, the spice roots Christopher Columbus took off to go find pepper. I mean, that's why he came to the Americas, was to find pepper.
With salt, though, that's one of our tastes in our tongue, and our body craves it. But pepper, where does that fall on our taste profile on our tongues? Is it a little bit of the bitter, a little bit of the
flavor?
There's definitely some bitter. It encompasses a lot of flavors.
So it kind of hits on a lot of the different parts of our tongue, not just one.
But different types of peppers have different types of qualities as well.
Black pepper is more fruity. Black pepper is more fruity. White pepper is more. White pepper is a little spicier, I guess, a little hotter.
Yeah, well, white pepper is the exclusion of the outer coating.
Yeah, but it's ripened longer, I believe. The white pepper is ripened longer than the black pepper. Pepper, I believe.
That would make sense. Yeah.
You can look it up.
I'm sure I knew this at one point, but it was 20 plus years ago.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the red peppercorns is an entirely different fruit.
It's not the same. It's not the same. Yeah.
But it tastes good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like them.
Szechuan peppercorns. Szechuan peppercorns.
That's a prickly ash bud. It's not even related to real pepper, true black, like what we think of as pepper.
Right. Good though. Ooh.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more. Let's dive a little deeper into salt. We touched on it a little bit here and there, but I want to talk about why salt is different than any other seasoning. It's different than garlic and onion and basil and herbs and all that, even pepper, because of its chemical reaction and what it can do, and our bodies actually need it. So I want to talk a little bit about brining and all that, and curing to some extent, but more of what makes salt so different and how it reacts to proteins when we use it for that, when we use it for brining and stuff like that. So, because it's not just a seasoning, it's not just a spice, it is something that actually, the only thing that'll actually penetrate deep into a protein.
Well, we can use it to denature proteins to begin with, which will help with preservation in the long term.
One of the biggest, things, and you guys know, on the Facebook groups and the cooking groups, and especially from people who really don't have an understanding of how, science works with cooking. They don't understand that cooking has got a lot of science built into it, and we use so much of it in the cooking, is when they use a brine or they use a cure or what have you, and they put all these other flavors in it. They really think that the meat sucks it up like a sponge, but we know that, it's more of diffusion, a chemical reaction that the salt has, where the salt actually penetrates, but all the other stuff just kind of hangs out around it on the outside. And
Well,
I had a conversation yesterday with somebody on one of the Facebook groups, and they swear up and down the orange flavor that they put in that brine goes deep into the meat, and
maybe an eighth of an inch over a couple of weeks. Not much.
Yeah, and they think that because it dissolves in the water, and they think the water is getting sucked up into like a sponge, which is totally not the way that works. But people will fight you up and down.
a brine by definition is basically salt and water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so when you're talking about a dry brine, you're getting water introduced. So water's going to come out of the meat when you dry brine something, and then the salt and the water are going to go back into the meat. Same thing happens with wet brining. Now, I've had a few conversations that have gotten pretty heavy and hard with Lloyd about how, the difference between dry brining and wet brining and all that. But when you're brining with just salt and to a certain extent sugar, you're getting diffusion and osmotic reactions. So osmosis deals with water. Diffusion, well, it's both. I don't know if more salt is actually drawn into the muscle than more water is. I would agree. I would actually guess that more water is taken in, but I don't know that for a fact. And I've talked to Lloyd about different things. I tend to do dry brines on like red meats, mostly, a lot of steaks, that sort of thing. Wet brine I've always done on chicken, turkey, sometimes pork. But you can take it to a point, and I've played around with this where, if I do a wet brine on a chicken breast for 24 hours, I can take that out and cook it up on a grill or something. People are like, wow, this is really moist. This is really good. If I let it go for 6 days, all of a sudden it takes on the characteristics of like the kind of chicken roll sort of thing you'd get at your deli at the grocery market. It just has that sort of weird texture. It has a processed weird texture, even though it wasn't processed. It was just in a brine.
One of the places I usually go to is, of course, Dr. Blonder. And, he's a meathead on AmazingRibs.com also does a lot of his stuff. So he's a big food scientist, and he's done a lot of studies on that stuff. So I usually point people to those articles on Amazing Ribs, because it's kind of put into, there's a lot of science that goes into it, and he put a lot of effort into showing people why things work. And I've always been that way in my cooking processes, and that's why I love sous vide. I want to know why things work the way they work, and the hows and the whys.
Dr. Blonder knows his stuff. He's definitely a good source.
So, he's done a lot of good stuff, and he does these things. And that's why I just kind of went to his site, because he actually does the experiments and shows you the difference and what diffusion is. And one of the things that I'm really, one of the things, with salt, if you put too much salt on your steak, it gets overly salty, and you can go, oh man, I can't even eat it. But if you cook something in salt, it doesn't diffuse more salt into it. It only takes up a certain amount of salt. So if you see people cook, roasts caked in salt, and for hours, fish, and it comes out, or fish or what have you, but it doesn't, fill up the cells with just salt, So,
but if you left that roast or that fish for 5 days, it would. Depending on the size, obviously.
Well, it would equalize with the amount of salt that you've used.
It would. But it migrates very slowly. It's, like, I forget exactly I remember reading it on Meathead's site. I think it was like quarter inch every day.
I don't want to keep going down in rabbit holes. I knew we would, but I want to talk about creating different flavor profiles by using all the different spices, because I don't want to just harp on salt and that, because there are, an all-purpose seasoning, like I just said, is, one of the most popular is salt, pepper, and garlic, right?
Darn, what's that crap behind you?
That's all my seasonings. So, so that, if you take a salt, pepper, and garlic, that's one of the most popular. If you go to any of the spice aisle or even in the barbecue stores, they're all purpose rub. Everybody's got their own blend of all purpose, and they're all salt, pepper, and garlic. So those are the three tastes that I guess, like, especially for beef and chicken and pork, are what really enhance. So I guess those three spices or seasonings together produce some kind of umami that we all kind of like, right?
I don't see that happening. I think they taste good, but I don't think they're creating umami.
Well, they're creating something in our mouth that they're hitting all, few of the points of our tongue.
Yeah, but lemonade tastes great, and there's no umami in lemonade.
I think Kevin would agree.
That's totally different. Just say savory, a savory type flavor that the salt on its own doesn't have, or pepper on its own doesn't have. When you combine those three seasonings into one on your meat, it creates a different flavor in your mouth, correct? Can we agree to that?
Yes.
Yeah. You taste, garlic, onion, and rosemary.
So you're not tasting them separately.
You're
tasting them together as something totally different and new. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's when you combine, these different seasonings, you can combine basil and rosemary and thyme, it creates a whole different
herbs de Provence is the perfect example.
Yeah.
Herbs de Provence can actually, a good herbs de Provence mix can really take a bunch of different types of things up quite a high notch. I mean, it's probably my favorite mixed seasoning is herbs de Provence.
Where do you think adding, a lot of different spices gets too muddled? Because I've had that where if you just put too many different spices in, they kind of all maybe negate each other, and it just tastes like a muddled mess. Where do you think that comes into play?
I think it comes to play in American cuisine, and that's about it. Because if you think about Chinese food and Indian food, and Thai food and Vietnamese food. Now, Vietnamese actually gets pretty basic. Sorry, I shouldn't have included them in there because it's kind of they do, they don't go real heavy. But like in India, I mean, there might be 35 things that go into this meal that you're making. And there are many cultures that are like that. We tend to get stuck in certain types of herbs and spices that get muddied, and they're not as strong. And we are often using, I don't know. I only run into that here.
Indian cooking, they use a plethora of spices. Indian cooking they use a lot of spices and herbs. They use a lot.
You think?
Yeah, I do. I know so. They get up using 8 or 9 different flavors in one rub, but it doesn't get muddied at all. In the American cuisine, like Kevin said, oh man, you ever watched the show? Was it Dives? Bars, Dives, and whatever else?
Drive-ins and dives. Yeah,
some of these rubs they use, they have like 15 ingredients inside one rub. And I think that's kind of overkill.
But sometimes they work. I mean,
sometimes they do, and sometimes you see people use different mixtures, and you go, "Why? Why add that ingredient in there? Because it's totally different from the others." Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But and it takes experimentation, I guess, a lot. But I find, sometimes the simple is better, but then sometimes, there's something that you may use something totally different that you're not really used to. Like you were saying, some of the Indian spices, probably 90% of the, people in America don't have those in their cabinet, cardamom, who would use cardamom, and, they don't even know what it is half the time, but it's really
or
big.
what to do with it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And exactly. So that's one of the things, and one of the books that I looked at was the Flavor Bible. Me and Lloyd were actually talking about this earlier. And
It's a good book.
So yeah, the Flavor Bible is a really good one.
Yep.
Where it takes you pretty much breaks down what seasonings and spices go well together and different cuisines. I mean, it's a really, I have it too here, Lloyd. So it's a really thick book, and it's good. I mean, you could go down a big rabbit hole with this for sure.
I have it somewhere, but I can't remember where I put it.
But you can go on Amazon and look at it, and you can do the little preview, and it kind of goes over what they talk about. And they did a lot of research, had a lot of chefs, involved, and they actually talk about, texture and mouthfeel and aroma as well. So it's not just about, tasting in our mouth. Yeah. So it's the overall, but it's a really good book to, if you got time to go down the rabbit hole. A lot of people don't want to, they just want to just give me something, that's why I sell, the rubs. They just want
well, yeah, I mean,
for them.
You might, it's a lot easier. And I mean, not being a culinary professional, I would probably just be ordering your rubs instead of, reading an encyclopedia on flavor and what to do and how to do it, and then being like, wait a minute, I just read 400 pages, I don't know what to do.
Well,
I'll order Darren's spices.
Well, for a lot of years, I would order somebody's seasoning or rub and just see how I liked it, and then I would try to replicate it or put my own spin to it. So, but a book like that actually gives you some knowledge on why certain seasonings and spices work well with each other and how they interact with each other, which I think a lot of people, once they get into it, if you're really into cooking, it's a really good book. And there's another one called The Flavor Matrix that Chef James Briscoe put together that actually breaks it down into like a wheel of the different flavors and your tastes and all that. And it's pretty complicated. I don't have that particular book. I know that it's on Amazon too.
I've heard he really did a good job with that. I don't have it either, but he's down in Pensacola, and it's interesting to follow him.
But yeah, so there's a lot of information out there and on how the different seasonings can work well together. And like I said, you can go down that rabbit hole, like you said, Kevin. There's you go from basic to 42 different spices in a seasoning rub, and it doesn't come out muddled. You can put 10 different seasonings in something and it comes out muddled. It's because you're using the wrong seasonings together. So I really get into playing around with the different spices and seasonings and trying to create something new. That's why I did with the blueberry and black garlic seasoning that I came out with. I just didn't see anything out there like that. I played around with it because I had a freeze dryer. I freeze dried a bunch of blueberries and I said, what should I do with it? Let's see if I can make a seasoning out of it. And what would go good? And I got a savory and sweet with the blueberry and black garlic, and it works well on ribs and pork, man. It just creates a great bark. Does a lot of the things that everybody looks forward to in a good barbecue rub, but it's not cheap. And it's the ingredients aren't just salt and sugar and, paprika, which a lot of those.
I think you gave a lot of good thought to that, because there's nothing else out there like that. You're filling a niche.
Yeah. And it doesn't get muddled. It actually, it's got the salt. It's got the salt in it. It's got the sweet and it's got the savory. It's got a little bit of everything.
I used one of your rubs the other night. I don't know if I sent you a picture. I'll send you one if I didn't, but yeah, it worked great. It had some coffee in it that you could smell the coffee in the beginning,
but then the black garlic and coffee.
Yeah, that one. And then but the coffee was, so when you smelled it originally, that was the predominant smell and what I figured would be the predominant flavor, but it went to the back and was just subtle after cooking with it.
Yeah, I've played around with coffee rubs for years now, and I've used it without black garlic. I've used it with regular garlic and other things, And what I've found is with coffee, if you have coffee and pepper in a rub, they actually enhance each other and they actually change the flavor of each other. So the coffee really doesn't taste like coffee anymore. You smell it, like you said, and the pepper kind of mellows out. And then now you throw in that black garlic and you get that effect like hardcore carnivore with black, where they have activated charcoal to bring the color. Activated charcoal has no flavor at all. And Jess Pryles will tell you, I had her on my podcast. She said that doesn't add any flavor. It's just for color.
It's color, yeah.
But so I decided I wanted to make something that had the dark black color, but also provided flavor. So when I was playing around with black garlic, and I said, well, I like the coffee and pepper and salt and garlic rub that I make. What if I use black garlic? And it just all came together and it just fit so well. The garlic, I put a little bit of regular garlic, but the black garlic is more mellow than regular garlic. And the coffee and the black pepper and the salt, it just plays really well. I mean, that's every time I cook that for somebody on a steak, they're just like, they're blown away by it. I think everybody, even people when I started giving out that to people, they're like, man, this is like my favorite rub on steak or roast. So.
But it costs money. Activated charcoal is cheap. Black garlic is very, very expensive.
Exactly. And that's, like I said, I didn't want to put out something that was cheap. I'm not really looking to make a ton of money on my stuff. And, it's more of I'm creating something different, even though it may cost a little bit more. It's going to be different than what everybody else has on the market. And it's going to provide a better flavor. That's what I wanted to create. So, and that's why, I like black garlic a lot, but it's expensive and nobody else has the, they're just too scared to use it because of it's limited and where you can get it. It costs a lot more than regular garlic. And most of the stuff that's out there on the shelves, it's all cheap ingredients. It's sugar, it's salt, it's, paprika. It's, it costs $1.50 for them to make it and they'll sell it to you for $8. So like I said, you guys know, I got all these seasonings behind me here and
I thought you became a librarian.
I've learned a lot just in doing this myself, all what goes into it. So you really can't just make up a whole bunch of seasonings in your kitchen and turn around and sell them. You can, but you got to do it a certain way. And it's very hard to do it in volume.
You wouldn't make
I kind
any
of started
money.
out making out some and selling some to people that I knew and on the Facebook group just to kind of see how it would go over. But once you get into the actual process, I mean, it can get kind of, there's a lot of things that go into it. Seasonings are a lot easier, because they're all dry ingredients. There's not a lot of, the FDA doesn't get involved too much in it as long as you have a, health inspector comes and make sure there's no bugs and everything is kind of,
you did it professionally, Darren. You did it professionally. The boxes behind you are professionally done.
Oh yeah. Everything's done professionally and everything's, the labeling's all done correctly. So, I mean, the labeling is the biggest thing when you're doing seasonings and making sure that that's done. Because, as long as you got your health inspected kitchen and everything else, they're okay as long as everything is what it's supposed to be. When you get into sauces now, you're talking a lot different because you're talking shelf stability of liquids and stuff is a lot different. The FDA really puts their hand on it. And so I got a sauce that I'm producing here too. And I have a different co-packer because usually only the real big ones will do both a sauce or a seasoning. But when you get into smaller producers, they'll only do one or the other because, like I said, seasonings are easier, but sauces, you don't really want to have a facility that has both in one facility. You need like two separate areas. So you need to have a really big warehouse to have two separate areas, or you just do one. So a lot of the ones like this, I'm doing a separate co-packer for my sauce, but a lot goes into this that, they have to heat it up for 6 minutes, 180 degrees so they can, bottle it just right.
The pH has got to be below 4.6 to bottle like that.
Well, really, it's got to be like around a 3.5.
3.2 or 3. Yeah, 3.5.
3.5 is what the FDA says. It has to be at 3.5.
4.6 is the botulism minimum.
Yeah, 4.6
4.6 is honey. You can do it at honey is where 4.6 falls in. But on a bottled sauce, they needed to be around 3.5. That's what they want.
They're super conservative. 4.6 is all you need. So it's the FDA. It's like pasteurization. They overkill. An overkill.
And I remember a little bit. I talked to a co-packer that does, infused honeys, and that's where they get a little crazy, because honey on its own is they're okay with, but when you start adding stuff to it, it changes the whole structure, and they got to make then they want the pH level to go down, because you can sell just like a regular processed honey at like 4.2 and they're fine with it, but you start adding chili powder and stuff to it, like with Mike's hot honey, they add vinegar to it because it lowers the pH. So it gets that pH down to that 3.5 level, and then they're okay. I think you don't want to heat honey.
I think I remember talking to you, Darren, about how when I was cooking on Nantucket, the chef I worked for, the chef owner, developed cranberry barbecue sauce, because at that point I think Nantucket still had the largest cranberry bog in the world. But it cost him, I think, $18,000 to do a shelf stability test back in the 90s. It was just for and I don't know what else it had to go under, but it was damn expensive, the shelf stability testing. And I think, I don't know the whole process. I was never in the factory or what they were doing, the lab, but I'm sure they heat it up, cool it down. But, it's a lot cheaper now.
I just got mine last week, my approval, and what they do, they send it off to I think they send it off to University of North Carolina to their lab, and they do the testing. And that's pretty much, they just do the pH testing on it.
Okay.
They run it through some tests, and so now, I paid like $500 or something was my initial test out the recipe, and and that included the pH testing in the final. And then, so $500 up front just to get the recipe processed, get it tested, and then, separate for getting the volume done. So, but up front it's $500, and they'll go through all the gyrations up to 3 test batches to make sure it right. And I had to do 3 because the first one they sent me didn't look anything like the one I made.
They do heat and cooling and all that.
Yeah. The one I use, they don't do any cold stuff, so they don't do like a mayonnaise based sauce. So I'm looking at another co-packer that can do both, because that's another thing too you got to look at, because some of these places, they can only do certain types of sauces. So the one I used, they mostly do hot sauces, and all their sauces are cooked up to 180 degrees for at least 6 minutes. You can't do that with a mayonnaise based sauce or a dressing, so because it separates it. And
freezing it separates it as well.
So so it's different, so like even making like an Italian dressing or a creamy type dressing, they can't do those at that facility because they don't have the process in place to do it. So but I learned a lot about how things have to be done, and you don't really think about it when you're just doing it at your house or when you're buying at the store, all the things that go into getting this stuff put together so you can actually put it on a shelf and sell it. But
well, I'm sure they have to put a HACCP plan through.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're those both of those type of facilities, or even just the regular seasoning, they have HACCP plans in place, and they keep a lot of their ingredients in walk-in refrigerators too. So
I think it's worth spending the money just to avoid having to do your own HACCP plan, which will probably be turned down 15 times. You save money doing that, having a pro do it.
Oh yeah. Well, for me, there was no actual way I could actually make my own seasonings, starting from scratch. You hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars just to, purchase a factory.
To set everything up. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, a lot of these places, like the one I used for the seasonings, he has his own line of seasonings, but he, his main business is doing it for other people. He's got, barbecue chefs that, just do competitions, and he makes, just enough to to provide them. He'll do 100 cases, and they just use it and sell it at their barbecue shows and stuff. So but So
Why not?
there's a lot of but there's, like I said, there's a lot that goes into it. But it's interesting to me how it can be done. Like I said, I never thought 2 years ago that I'd be sitting there with
In the sauce and rub business.
and just trying to get it up and running. But
Hey, you know what, Darren? Nobody else did either.
yeah. So it's but it's fun, and I like this kind of stuff. We're the kind of guys that we like to play around with stuff, and if you're like, you like to do that kind of stuff. So like I said, I tried to create something that I saw there was nothing on the market and like it, and just being different, and it tastes good. So
Plus you enjoy it. You enjoy it.
Yeah, he loves it.
So
Yeah.
And that's why it's here. I'm not going to sell it. I'm going to keep it all for myself. My wife wouldn't let me. So.
Yeah.
So
she wouldn't let you stay or let the spices stay.
She'd let them stay. She'd sell them after me. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Darren, get out. I'm keeping the spices.
Exactly.
So Lloyd, you created some of your own seasonings. You actually sent me some of your umami seasoning a couple of years back. So I know you like to play around with yourself. Have you ever thought of producing your own and putting the kosher dosher label on a?
I have, but it's too much work. It would take away my joy of just cooking. So I've done my own spices, of course, and I've actually taken mushrooms and dehydrated them down to the point where it was a powder. So I actually went the old-fashioned route, where I dehydrated everything and made my own rubs and stuff. But it's too much work. I just do it for fun. It's too much work. What you're doing, Darren, is work to me.
I want to thank you guys for joining me tonight. And we could probably sit here all night and talk about seasonings and all this stuff and cooking, because we're food geeks. But I want to thank you guys, and we'll probably do this again in another month and talk about another topic. We'll probably figure it out. But thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Check out the Kosher Dosher. Just do a Google search on Google for Kosher Dosher. You'll get his blog. Follow him on Facebook. You can also, if you're in the Facebook groups, a lot of the sous vide Facebook groups, and even my Facebook groups, Fire and Water Cooking. Lloyd is always in there, and so is Kevin. Kevin, thanks again for being here. Kevin, Sous Vide Food and Fun Facebook group as well. But thanks again, guys. As always, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for spending the time. And thank you all for watching and following the Fire and Water Cooking podcast. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
All right. Thanks again for joining us, guys. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram. Check out the Fire and Water Cooking Edible Creation Seasonings on Amazon, Walmart, and our website. I'll see you again on the next one. Thanks for joining.